And welcome to week number 2 of the course, where we will begin tackling the topic of learning environments. A couple of housekeeping things real quick before we get started. I want to encourage you to please take a minute and look at week number 2's discussion board topic and get that taken care of. Hopefully you'll find it interesting and applicable. Final reminder that case study number 1 is due very soon. If you haven't started it, I would highly recommend that you do so immediately. Hopefully you'll find it pretty interesting. Most of the content relates to week number 1, so you can refer backwards if you need to. If you have any questions about it or are confused about any aspects of it, just let me know and we would be more than happy to help you with it. As always, if you have any questions or need anything course related, just let us know. We'd be happy to help you. That could be related to this week or just the course in general. And I definitely want you to go ahead and look at the readings for this week. This microlecture is going to be intentionally very short, so a lot of the content is going to be really sitting in the readings for this week. So what is a learning environment? I think it's probably pretty self-explanatory, but a learning environment is really any setting or situation in which student learning occurs. Obviously, we've traditionally thought of learning environments as primarily kind of brick and mortar classroom settings, and that's certainly, still true to a large extent, but we really now are expanding the boundaries of that beyond that limitation and really including any possible setting and situation in which student learning occurs as really being considered a learning environment. So let's think for a minute about classroom learning environments. Again, this is the sort of traditional model for how we would think about student learning and think about learning environments. I normally think of best practices when it comes to classroom learning environments as pretty common sense related. Maintaining positive environments, inclusivity, openness, commitment to diversity. But I want to pause for a second and talk about developmentally appropriate and supportive environments, because I really think this strongly connects to what we delved deeply into when we started talking about student development theory, and I'm hoping you're starting to sort of draw some interconnectivity there. So, for example, if you're in a classroom setting and you're teaching entirely first-year college students versus entirely graduate students, obviously there's going to be some developmentally appropriate considerations you need to make for that setting. So again, I want you to start thinking about what types of components of student development theory might be applicable within a classroom learning environment, what you can do to sort of meet students where they are, and just sort of begging, borrowing, and stealing from student development theory and applying that actively into the learning environment, conversation, and consideration. It's not by accident that we started this course by deeply delving into student development theory, because again, it's going to give you the background and the backbone for all the things we're going to talk about further. And I'm hoping that you're sort of starting to think as you're digesting this information about, okay, this is how things connect to student development. So chatting for a minute about non-classroom or out-of-the-classroom learning environments. Again, traditionally for centuries, we thought about student learning being very regimented and really within the walled confines of the classroom environment. But we're of course learning more and more that student learning occurs everywhere imaginable. Obviously, there's a lot of emerging evidence to indicate that experiential learning of all kinds can be incredibly powerful and formative for the student learning process. And really, just think about how many possible opportunities there are for non-classroom, learning environments and learning experiences, whether it be study abroad or students doing actual physical field work or just guest lectures or taking class outside or doing sort of anything that sort of exceeds the confines of the traditional learning environment. I normally think when I think about, best practices and basic principles of non-classroom learning as really being pretty similar to, the positivity and inclusiveness and cooperation and camaraderie sort of components that, demarcate the positive classroom learning environments that we talked about. And again, I want you to give some consideration to, how does student development theory, how do the principles of student development that we talked about in week 1 really apply within the non-classroom learning environment? Start to sort of draw those connections. Think about what types of things from student development you can apply to best practices and sort of start integrating within your thinking and thought process around non-classroom learning environments. So, real quick conclusion, and again, I know this week's Microlecture is super short. I want you to make sure you take a look at the readings. They're going to give you a lot more detail. I just wanted to spend a couple minutes with you, just kind of, chatting through it and summarizing things up and just giving you some framework for my brain on the topic. Again, learning is still, considered to be a traditional classroom environment, but obviously we're thinking more and more about what lies beyond those confines. Okay, so again, learning occurs everywhere. Learning occurs in all imaginable settings, whether they be curricular, co-curricular, experiential, completely non-curricular related. Learning occurs, hence there's a learning environment. And again, common sense practices, that really are related to supporting students appropriately where they are, thinking about student development, encouraging communication, both directions, and really being organized and supporting a collaborative environment. And again, I know I'm repeating myself again, but really start thinking strongly about what opportunities there are to integrate student development theory, student development best practices within learning environments, both in and outside of the classroom.